Tropical Storm Irma is forecast to strengthen into hurricane Thursday. Meteorologists expect Tropical Storm Irma to become the fourth hurricane of the season on Thursday. The storm continued to intensify steadily in the eastern Atlantic Ocean and was pushing west in the direction of the Leeward Islands. Although the storm doesn't present an immediate threat to any land areas, Local 10 News Hurricane Specialist Max Mayfield said Irma is not going to go away anytime soon. Meteorologists expect the storm to have maximum sustained winds strengthening to 120 miles per hour Monday evening and to move northwest up towards the U.S. It's too early to tell if the storm is going to impact U.S. land, but that could change next week. This is definitely one we need to keep an eye on for later in the Bahamas and South Florida, Mayfield said. South Carolina beaches weather the storm as forecasters Irma. Area beaches got through the recent spate of stormy weather without a lot of damage, but there's a new, potentially major threat brewing off the coast of Africa. Tropical Storm Irma is forecast to gradually intensify and could become a hurricane by Friday. The system was a few hundred miles west of the Cabo Verde Islands, the National Hurricane Center reported Wednesday. That's the one to keep an eye on. All the models have shown it strengthening to a major hurricane, said Drew Giles of Coastal Science and Engineering in Colombia. It is too soon to say whether Irma will become a threat to the U.S. mainland. The storm was moving west at 15 miles per hour with a maximum sustained winds of 60 miles per hour. Locally, officials were assessing damage from the strong winds, powerful currents and churning surf that rose up over the weekend. At Folly Beach, storm surge water remained on the beach in many places. It's not possible to determine whether significant erosion has taken place until the water recedes and we take some initial measurements, said Spencer Wetmore, city manager. The storm kicked up winds gusting to about 40 miles per hour that blew sheets of stinging sand on some beaches. Strong currents prompted lifeguards to fly the caution flag to warn beachgoers of hazardous surf conditions. On Isle of Palms, high surf carved into some sections of the beach. The city has not received any reports of extreme erosion, said city manager Linda Tucker. We have experienced beach debris and some escarpments. An escarpment happens when storm tides chew away at dunes. Edisto Beach, which recently completed a renourishment project, has less of a slope toward the ocean now because of the stormy weather. The beach was designed to flatten out over time. That's essentially what's happened, said Mayor Jane Darby. We have lost some beach, but it was not catastrophic. Kiawah Island wildlife biologist Jim Jordan said the high tides washed over a few turtles' nests and took out some fledgling dunes. There's no real damage. It might have set things back a couple of months, he said. A project to restore the beach in Garden City and Surfside Beach was halted because of the weather, but operations resumed Wednesday. There was little damage to the beaches in Ari County, said spokeswoman Lisa Bauerkier. We fared well, she said. Mexico City, AP, Tropical Storm Lydia formed off Mexico's Pacific coast Wednesday as authorities warned the Baja California peninsula to prepare for high winds, heavy rain and a dangerous storm surge along the shore that includes the twin resort cities of Los Cabos. A new tropical storm, Irma, also formed far out in the eastern Atlantic, but forecasters said it did not pose an immediate threat to land. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Lydia was expected to approach the southern tip of Baja California on Thursday night. It said some strengthening was expected and the storm still has the opportunity to be near hurricane strength before landfall. Mexican authorities posted a tropical storm warning for the southern part of the Baja Peninsula. A hurricane watch also was issued. Lydia had maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, 65 kilometers per hour. Wednesday night. Its center was about 160 miles, 255 kilometers, south-southeast of the peninsula's tip Wednesday evening, and it was heading north-northwest at 7 miles per hour, 11 kilometers per hour. The Hurricane Center said the storm was dumping heavy rains over southwestern Mexico and could produce total accumulations of as much as 8 to 12 inches across much of Baja California sur state and western Jalisco, threatening flash floods and landslides. Tropical Storm Irma formed over the far eastern Atlantic Ocean and was predicted to become a hurricane Thursday. It was on a general path that could bring it near the eastern entrance to the Caribbean Sea by early next week. Irma's center was about 545 miles, 875 kilometers, west of the Cape Verde Islands. Maximum sustained winds were 65 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour, with higher gusts. It was heading west at 12 miles per hour, 19 kilometers per hour, and no coastal watches or warnings were in effect. Copyright 2017 The Associated Press. All rights reserved. This material may not be published, broadcast, rewritten or redistributed. Newly formed Tropical Storm Lydia is swirling over the Pacific toward the southern end of Mexico's Baja California peninsula and is expected to be closing in on the coastal area that includes the twin resort cities of Los Cabos on Thursday night. Mexican authorities warned residents of lower Baja to prepare for high winds, heavy rain and a dangerous storm surge after Lydia formed Wednesday. Heavy rain also was reported falling on southwestern Mexico. Forecasters said Lydia could produce total accumulations of as much as 8 to 12 inches across much of Baja California Sur State and western Jalisco State on the mainland, threatening flash floods and landslides. Another tropical storm, Irma, also formed far out in the eastern Atlantic on Wednesday, but forecasters said it posed no immediate threat to land. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Lydia was expected to approach the southern tip of Baja California on Thursday night. It said some strengthening was expected during the day and the storm still has the opportunity to be near hurricane strength before making landfall. Lydia had maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, 65 kilometers per hour. Wednesday night. Its center was about 160 miles, 255 kilometers, south-southeast of the peninsula's tip Wednesday evening, and it was heading north-northwest at 7 miles per hour, 11 kilometers per hour. Tropical Storm Irma formed over the far eastern Atlantic Ocean and was predicted to become a hurricane Thursday. It was on a general path that could bring it near the eastern entrance to the Caribbean Sea by early next week. Irma's center was about 545 miles, 875 kilometers, west of the Cape Verde Islands. Maximum sustained winds were 65 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour, with higher gusts. It was heading west at 12 miles per hour, 19 kilometers per hour, and no coastal watches or warnings were in effect. Now the former mayor of Houston has become one. 12 years ago this month, Houston Mayor Bill White did the seemingly unthinkable, opening the doors of his thriving city to a traumatized flood of homeless Katrina evacuees, more than 200,000 of them in all. It was a complicated political gamble, which he justified in shockingly uncomplicated terms. You should treat your neighbors the way you'd want to be treated, he argued. A controversial decision at the time, it is remembered as one of the city's finest moments. Now the man known for sheltering displaced evacuees during a historic disaster is himself in need of shelter. On Sunday, White's home in the upscale Memorial neighborhood of West Houston was engulfed by Tropical Storm Harvey's fast-rising flood waters, leaving the prominent Houstonian to fend for himself in the sprawling urban pond like so many others. Houston mayor imposes a nightly curfew to help stem looting in Harvey's wake. A photo taken by a neighbor moments after he was forced from his home shows the 63-year-old wading cautiously in waist-deep, coffee-colored waters, a hiking pole in one hand, a black briefcase full of work documents in the other. On his face, a faint smile. His attempt to stay upbeat amid tragedy, he said, is barely visible. Asked what he thought the public might make of the distressing image, White paused. I hope it says we're all in the same boat here in Houston, regardless of who you are, he said, speaking on his cell phone from a neighbor's house, where he is living at the moment. The great equalizer. 5 days after Harvey arrived, that boat remains in the thick of what has begun to feel like a protracted, slow-motion nightmare. The former politician, now working as a senior advisor for a financial services firm, joins tens of thousands of his fellow Houstonians in an epic communal struggling to endure the biggest rainstorm in the history of the continental United States. Unlike Katrina, which hurt New Orleans' most vulnerable residents, Harvey saturated vast swaths of Houston, a 650-square-mile metropolis. The result was a storm that left almost no neighborhood untouched, forcing rich and poor and suburbanites and city dwellers of all backgrounds into the streets of one of the most diverse cities in America. It has hit people across the economic spectrum, White said. Neighborhoods in Northeast Houston, where home prices are $20,000 and $30,000 are underwater, and some of the most expensive houses in the metro area along Buffalo Bayou had extensive damage and required people to be rescued. The number of people in the city who sustained damage to a vehicle or a home will be in the hundreds of thousands, he predicted. White escapes his home. White never expected to be one of them. He and his wife built their home on stilts overlooking one of the city's well-known bayous. Sitting above the 100-year floodplain, the home was designed so that water could flow underneath the structure during a flood. On Sunday, White said, that didn't matter, as the bayou started swelling like a river, surrounding the home. Like countless Houstonians taken by surprise by Harvey's deepening waters, White realized he didn't have much time. White's wife, Andrea, an author of young adult books and an editorial writer at the Houston Chronicle, was working outside the house at the time, he said. Then I heard the gurgling of the water pressing against the floorboards, and in a few minutes it started pouring out of cracks and electrical outlets until it was up to my ankles, he said. I grabbed a few vital papers and put on a backpack that I prepared, and I carried what I could to the upstairs. Then, with neighbors looking from afar, I waded into the waist-deep water until I could get to higher ground. He wore khaki shorts, waterproof hiking boots, wool socks and a t-shirt, and carried some extra socks and underwear in his backpack, he said. I was trying to have a good attitude, and I was smiling at my neighbors, who were looking at their neighbor and former mayor wading chest-deep in water, White added. Despite being homeless, White said he has spent recent days glued to his phone, talking to relatives and professional contacts, as well as fielding calls from emergency responders eager to tap some of the knowledge he amassed navigating Houston through powerful storms like Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Ike. Andrea White is staying at the family's country home about 20 miles outside town. Their 3 children are grown and living on their own. Tuesday night, with city shelters overflowing, Harris County officials reached out to White, former Harris County Judge Robert Eccles, and former Houston Mayor Annise Parker to assist them in quickly opening a shelter for storm victims at Energy Park, a convention-style hall next door to the stadium where the NFL's Houston Texans play. The shelter, run by local nonprofit Baker Ripley, will be able to house as many as 10,000 people and will include a pharmacy, a children's center, and an area for pets, Harris County Judge Ed Emmett told reporters, according to NBC affiliate KPRC. How Houston can house its people. The shelter is a temporary solution, White said, a lesson city officials learned after Katrina, when newly arrived flood victims were given apartments vouchers that allowed them to settle in 35,000 vacant apartments. In the process, NPR reported a year after the storm, Houston spent far less money than the Federal Emergency Management Agency did on sheltering evacuees in trailers and hotels in other states. We got people out of shelters and into apartments so people could be going to work and going to school rather than the FEMA approach, White said, noting that he thinks the same approach will work for Harvey flood victims. If we end up now with over 100,000 people with homes that are uninhabitable, well, you need some kind of voucher program that puts people quickly into modest apartments. The many Houstonians who are living at the margin of existence on minimum wage or who are seniors living off Social Security, that's what they'll need. White doesn't know if his home is salvageable. If it is, he said, he intends to rebuild, but isn't worried about his residence at the moment. We lived in the house 18 years and raised the kids there, had a lot of memorable events there, White said. I arise each day lucky to be alive, and I know there are people who don't have the safety net that my family does. And frankly, my thoughts are more about them than material things I have lost, he added. Tropical Storm Irma forms over far eastern Atlantic, could become hurricane by Friday. As the rainfall from now Tropical Storm Harvey continues to pour down on southeastern Texas and southwestern Louisiana, a new tropical storm is forming over the far eastern Atlantic, the National Hurricane Center said Wednesday. The storm, named Irma, poses no immediate threat to land, the center said in its latest advisory. However, some strengthening is forecast during the next 48 hours and Irma could become a hurricane on Friday, said the advisory. For now, Irma has maximum sustained winds of 50 miles an hour. The National Hurricane Center says Tropical Storm Irma has formed over the far eastern Atlantic Ocean but poses no immediate threat to land. At 11 a.m. EDT Wednesday, the storm was about 420 miles, 676 kilometers, west of the Cabo Verde Islands. Maximum sustained winds were 50 miles per hour, 85 km/h, with higher gusts. The present movement is west at 13 miles per hour, 20 km/h. The general movement is expected to continue for the next couple of days. No coastal watches or warnings are in effect. The Hurricane Center says some strengthening is forecast during the next 48 hours and Irma could become a hurricane on Friday. Tropical Storm Irma picked up strength Wednesday and is expected to become a hurricane by Thursday or Friday, making it the fourth hurricane of an increasingly busy season. In their latest advisory, National Hurricane Center forecasters said sustained winds had reached 60 miles per hour as the storm rolls west at 15 miles per hour. While it's too early to tell what threat Irma may pose to Florida or the U.S. coast, it has the potential to gain significant strength as it crosses warm tropical Atlantic waters. Sea surface temperatures are more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, and encounters weak wind shear. Irma is moving along the southern edge of a high-pressure system that's helping steering it, forecasters said. During the next 3 days, it's expected to slow and begin turning toward the southwest. However, after that, the models diverge on which path the storm will take. What worries meteorologists is that the storm will track very close to a latitude and longitude in the tropical Atlantic that historically proved a turning point for threats to the islands and the U.S. coast. It's also not yet clear whether the high-pressure system, or a low-pressure trough, will win out in a tug-of-war over which direction it takes. A little too close for comfort, Colorado State University hurricane researcher Phil Klotzbach said in an email. However, models forecasting so far in the future can be notoriously unreliable, he explained. Beyond 7 days, I really don't much put stock in computer model forecasts, he said. Hurricane season entered its busiest time earlier this month, just after Franklin became the first hurricane of the season on August 10 and making landfall the next day in Mexico as a Cat 1 storm. On August 14, Hurricane Gert formed and remained well off the east coast of the U.S. Harvey became a hurricane last Thursday off the coast of Texas, before making landfall and stalling over Houston. National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration forecasters said the Atlantic Ocean's 2017 hurricane season will likely be above normal, with 11 to 17 named storms, 5 to 9 hurricanes and 2 to 4 major storms.
The latest. Best Buy sorry for overpriced water in Houston. 1:15 a.m. After 5 days of torrential rain, the latest weather forecast predicts less than an inch of rain and perhaps even sunshine for the Houston area. However, the dangers remain far from over. Authorities and family members have reported at least 18 deaths from Harvey, while law enforcement agencies say more than 13,000 people have been rescued in the Houston area and surrounding parts of southeast Texas. Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner also implemented a curfew of midnight to 5 a.m. in an apparent response to scattered reports of looting. Police Chief Art Acevedo said violators would be searched and arrested. 2 additional shelters, the Toyota Center and NRG Park, open to house displaced residents. Louisiana's governor also offered to take in Harvey victims from Texas, and televangelist Joel Osteen opened his Houston megachurch, a 16,000-seat former arena, after critics blasted him on social media for not acting to help families displaced by the storm. Harvey is expected to come inland Wednesday near the Texas-Louisiana border. 2 a.m. The National Weather Service has issued flash flood emergencies for parts of southeast Texas, including Beaumont and Port Arthur. KFDM-TV reports the situation in Port Arthur is dire as homes were expected to fill with rising floodwaters and residents unsure of how to evacuate the city. Jefferson County Sheriff Zena Stevens tells the station that county resources cannot get to Port Arthur because of the flooding and some residents have gone into survival mode. Mayor Derek Freeman said on his Facebook page that the city is underwater right now but we are coming. He also urged residents to get to higher ground. but avoid becoming trapped in attics. Deputy Marcus McClellan says city's 911 system has been inundated with calls, which are bouncing to other law enforcement agencies. McClellan says the sheriff's office is working to relay those calls to the proper authorities in Port Arthur. 4 a.m. The National Hurricane Center says Harvey is back on land after coming ashore early Wednesday just west of Cameron, Louisiana. The tropical storm is expected to weaken and continue to the north. The storm returned to land about 5 miles, 8 kilometers, west of Cameron with maximum sustained winds of 45 miles per hour, 72 kph. Center meteorologist Dennis Feltgen said Tuesday that when Harvey came back to shore, it's the end of the beginning. Harvey is forecast to drop substantial amounts of rain on Louisiana before moving on to Arkansas, Tennessee and parts of Missouri, which could also see flooding. Feltgen said there's still a lot of residents in multiple states who are going to feel the impacts of the storm. Harvey first made landfall Friday in Texas as a Category 4 hurricane. 7 a.m. A shelter near Houston for at least 100 displaced people has been overrun by Harvey floodwaters, forcing weary evacuees to retreat to bleacher seats. Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy Marcus McClellan said Wednesday that the Bowers Civic Center in Port Arthur was inundated overnight due to overwhelming rainfall and a nearby overflowing canal. Cots and belongings have been abandoned on the Civic Center floor, which is under about a foot, 30 centimeters, of water. McClellan says it's not clear where the evacuees will go. Some have been at the Civic Center since Monday. He says he's not sure if a Salvation Army shelter in Beaumont has space, and the Beaumont Civic Center can hold 600 people, but it's already at capacity. Beaumont is just northwest of Port Arthur. 8:15 a.m. An emergency management official east of Houston says the area bordering Louisiana is virtually isolated because primary roads are flooded and water levels are rising. Marcus McClellan, spokesman for the Jefferson County Emergency Management Office in Beaumont, said Wednesday that Interstate 10 is flooded, as are several highways and many secondary roads. I-10 from Houston to New Orleans is one of the most heavily traveled roads in the country, normally carrying tens of thousands of vehicles each day. McClellan says he's stationed at the Emergency Operations Center in downtown Beaumont, and to leave the area he'd have to travel east on secondary roads toward Louisiana, which is receiving the brunt of Tropical Storm Harvey. Beaumont Mayor Becky Ames on Wednesday told NBC's Today Show that every body of water around the city is overflowing and that the rain continues to fall. 8:45 a.m. Best Buy says it is deeply sorry following accusations of price gouging after a photo posted online showed cases of water for sale at one of the electronic retailer's Houston area stores for more than $42. The photo, which was widely shared on Twitter, appeared to have been taken by a Houston resident. Best Buy says the sale was clearly a mistake on the part of a few employees at a single store. The company explained in a statement that it doesn't have pricing for cases of water in its system, and employees priced the water by multiplying the cost of one bottle by the number of bottles in a case. The company says it's deeply sorry that we gave anyone even the momentary impression that we were trying to take advantage of the situation. Harvey costs projected to rise to $42 billion. Estimates for damages caused by Hurricane Harvey are climbing, with the storm poised to regain strength in the Gulf of Mexico before crashing back on land. Risk modeler Chuck Watson of Inky Research on Tuesday lifted his projection for economic losses to $42 billion, up about $12 billion from Monday. We have assumed more damage and obstruction to the drainage and flood control systems than was the case yesterday, he said in a note to clients. Analysts including David Havens at Imperial Capital have estimated the cost could top $100 billion, potentially causing more havoc than Hurricane Katrina in 2005, which spurred at least $118 billion of losses. About 47% of that was insured, while insurance brokers have said a lower portion of Harvey's costs will be covered because regular homeowners' policies don't include flood damage. You're not going to lose everything, Watson said by phone. Those assuming more than $100 billion in damages are assuming a lot of structures are going to be totaled with 100% losses rather than partial losses.
On the heels of Hurricane Harvey, Tropical Storm Irma forms. For a nation reeling from the devastation of Hurricane Harvey, on Wednesday came some unwelcome news. Another possible threat was brewing. Tropical Storm Irma has formed in the central Atlantic Ocean, the National Hurricane Center said. It poses no immediate threat to land, and it's too early to know its track, forecaster said. As of 5 p.m. ET, Irma had 60-mile-per-hour winds. It was located about 2,000 miles east of the Leeward Islands and about 3,000 miles southeast of Miami. Irma was moving to the west at 13 miles per hour. The storm is forecast to strengthen into a hurricane Thursday or Friday, with winds estimated at 75 miles per hour. A tropical storm becomes a hurricane when its sustained winds reach 74 miles per hour. Irma will take about a week to make its trek west across the Atlantic Ocean, AccuWeather said. Weatherbell meteorologist Ryan Maui said Irma will likely become an intense hurricane, with Category 4 or 5 strength, near the Leeward Islands of the Caribbean. Track Tropical Storm Irma. A Category 4 storm has winds of at least 130 miles per hour. It is way too soon to say with certainty where and if this system will impact the U.S. AccuWeather hurricane expert Dan Kotloski cautioned. Possibilities range from a landfall on the Leeward Islands in the northeastern Caribbean to the Carolinas and the island nation of Bermuda, and everything in between, he said. Yet another storm could spin up in the Gulf of Mexico by the weekend. If this system does develop, it could bring additional rainfall to portions of the Texas and Louisiana coasts. Meanwhile, in the eastern Pacific Ocean, a developing system that's expected to become Tropical Storm Lydia later Wednesday has prompted a hurricane watch for portions of Mexico's Baja Peninsula. This includes Cabo San Lucas. Tropical storm warnings are also in effect for the Baja as well as the west coast of Mexico. A tropical disturbance that just left the African coast Sunday has become the hurricane season's 9th named storm over the eastern tropical Atlantic Ocean. The National Hurricane Center declared that Tropical Storm Irma had formed at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and it is expected to strengthen. It is many days away from any land, but it should be monitored by interests in the Caribbean and United States. Meanwhile, a tropical system that could form in the western Gulf of Mexico near Louisiana and Texas early next week bears watching. Irma. Irma's was positioned 420 miles west of the Cabo Verde Islands on Wednesday, with maximum sustained winds of 50 miles per hour. It was tracking west at 13 miles per hour. Computer models are in excellent agreement that this storm will intensify in the coming days and could reach hurricane intensity by Friday or this weekend. It is still very far east, more than 2,000 miles east of the Leeward Islands, so there is plenty of time. Keep a watchful eye on it. Through the next 4 days or so, models also agree on where it will track, but beyond that, some potentially important divergence sets in. The farther north it goes, the more likely it becomes that it will recurve to the north and away from land. But if it stays farther south, away from weaknesses in a large area of high pressure in the subtropics, to its north, it can keep cruising toward the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico and possibly the United States. Gulf of Mexico system. Another area we continue to monitor is the northwestern Gulf of Mexico. Just days after Harvey moves out, another tropical disturbance or tropical cyclone could move in. It does not yet exist, but models have consistently been hinting at a disturbance developing in the Bay of Campeche and tracking toward Texas by Wednesday. The latest run of the U.S. GFS model produces 10 to 15 inches of rain in a swath spanning southeast Texas through southern Louisiana. There is still a lot of uncertainty with this system, but given the potential, it is important to be aware of it. If it develops but tracks a bit further east, the Texas coast could be spared. Hurricane season status update. Historically, over the past 50 years, the 9th named storm has formed September 30, on average. So Irma is exactly 1 month ahead of par. Accumulated cyclone energy, or ACE, is another useful metric we commonly use to assess how busy the hurricane season is. It is a single value that integrates information about all of the various storms' intensities over their entire lifespan. The ACE so far this hurricane season is at only about 92% of average, despite Harvey's rampage in the Gulf of Mexico and southeast Texas aside. The hurricane season is still young and just approaching its peak. Harvey makes second landfall as Gulf Coast relentlessly battered. On Tuesday morning, Disaster analyst Chuck Watson had pegged $42 billion as a reasonable estimate for the cost of destruction Tropical Storm Harvey would leave in its wake. By the end of the day, he'd added another $10 billion. Harvey's initial blast along the Texas coast as a Category 4 hurricane was bad enough, sending gasoline prices surging and crude futures plunging as refineries shut. Now the storm has returned, making landfall a second time in southwestern Louisiana, which was devastated by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The storm has brought torrential rain and the collapse of levees, dams and drains. That combination has analysts raising damage estimates by the hour and could easily push the catastrophe above the rank of Superstorm Sandy, the second costliest weather disaster in U.S. history. "We're on the verge of having cascading failures," said Watson, a Savannah, Georgia-based disaster modeler with Enki Research. "It is conceivable that we could get into the $60 to $80 billion range without that much effort." Louisiana, including New Orleans, is familiar with apocalyptic storms. Hurricane Katrina killed at least 1,800 and caused $160 billion in damage. Sandy, which slammed into New York and New Jersey in 2012, claimed 147 lives along its path from the Caribbean, including 72 in the U.S. The damage was about $70.2 billion, according to the U.S. National Centers for Environmental Information in Asheville, North Carolina. The death toll from Harvey had reached at least 18 on Wednesday, according to the Austin American-Statesman newspaper. The New York Times cited Texas authorities as saying they believed Harvey caused at least 30 deaths. A nighttime curfew, from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., was imposed in Houston Tuesday night as the storm center drifted back toward the Gulf of Mexico. The storm made landfall between Port Aransas and Port O'Connor in Texas on Friday, stalled out further inland over the weekend and is now trekking eastward. It is expected to reach the lower Mississippi Valley by Thursday. The storm will be followed by tornadoes from Louisiana to Arkansas. East Texas could get another 10 inches, 25 centimeters, of rain throughout the week. Harvey aligned perfectly to bring intense rain bands over Houston, said James Dunn, a project scientist and meteorologist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. As it drifted along the coast on Monday and Tuesday, it also perfectly aligned for Houston to get the peak rainfall. Harvey also created a situation where Gulf of Mexico waters have kept drumming hard up against the coastline, preventing rainwater from running off into the sea and backing everything up for miles around. The ferocious arrival was tempered by high-pressure systems across the U.S., including a large one that pushed temperatures in California beyond 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 Celsius, said Phil Klodsbach, a hurricane researcher at Colorado State University. Harvey became a pebble and stagnant stream. Predictions were that some areas east of Houston would witness 50 inches or more of rain by the time Harvey moved off into the central U.S. As of 3 a.m. local time Wednesday, the gauge at Montana Bellevue, east of the city, showed 51.88 inches had fallen since the start of the storm. That may be the most in recorded history for a tropical cyclone in the contiguous U.S., breaking a mark also set in Texas back in 1978. The record for all 50 states in such a storm was set in 1950 in Hawaii, 52 inches. Harvey's deluge was made all the worse because the ground was already saturated by heavy rainfall earlier in the season. "We have had roughly a year's worth of rain in the last 3 months, said Wendy Wong, a National Weather Service meteorologist in Dickinson, Texas, a city that was evacuated. Watson said disaster models just aren't calibrated for a thing like Harvey. For instance, a typical scenario will assume infrastructure such as dams, levees and drainage systems will fail when stress rates reach 80 to 90%. We are seeing failures at 60%, he said. The pressure on the Addicks and Barker reservoirs west of Houston spurred the Army Corps of Engineers to release water, which flooded neighborhoods that had been dry before. Now such deliberate flooding should be more calculated, Watson said. We're starting to get into the apocalyptic. This is what we don't want to have happen, he said. The Army Corps didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, but said earlier on Tuesday that no decision had been made to increase discharge rates and that dam releases were expected to occur for several months. Watson's other concern is how slowly water is draining away from Houston. Dunn said the reason may be that Harvey's surge is keeping up pressure on bays, inlets and the mouths of rivers, preventing runoff. It could also be evidence that the pipes and drainage systems are failing, Watson said. That, of course, would increase the ultimate financial pain of the storm. The Army Corps said in a statement that the dams are operating as expected. Precarious situation. Now, New Orleans and the rest of coastal Louisiana are feeling the brunt of Harvey's soaking rains, threatening yet another major U.S. refining center. The Hurricane Center said 3 to 6 inches could fall across eastern Louisiana, including New Orleans. Mississippi, Arkansas and Alabama could soon get as much as 10 inches. Storm surge warnings, which means there is a danger of facing a life-threatening inundation of water, are in effect for much of the Gulf Coast. The storm shut an estimated 3.9 million barrels a day of refining capacity due to flooding and port closures, according to Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated. Analysts including Damian Kervelin, Buffalo Gas Plant at Stanton, Texas, reduced sale of natural gas liquids by 58% as fractionator plants in Houston were closed, while Targa Resources Corporation said damage to its facilities is minimal so far. The infrastructure in New Orleans can barely keep up, Dunn said. New Orleans is in a very precarious situation. The forecast calls for the storm to continue into the central U.S., and it's expected to become a tropical depression by tonight. And even then, Houston won't be free from threats. Rainfall over the state will eventually need to make its way into the Gulf, which means several more pulses of water could be coming the city's way, Watson said. There is another train that is heading toward Houston, Watson said. Behind every one of these dollar signs is a family that doesn't have a house anymore.